How many of you have experienced microdosing? Okay. Now, one of the things that you have noticed is that there's no science yet, just worldwide use. Though there is something I call citizen science, which is the thousands and thousands of people who have talked to each other and helped each other, as well as the mushroom companies who write me thank you notes for all the kits they're selling. So a microdose of a psychedelic, and I'll just use the term microdose from here on, is a 1/10 to a 20th of the amount one would take if one were having a recreational dose. If one's talking about a transformational dose, we're really dealing with much higher numbers. But we're talking approximately 10 micrograms of LSD, between 1/10 of a gram and 4/10 of a gram of mushrooms, and you can take it from there. The discovery, and like everything else, when you deal with the natural world and with the plant world, it's always rediscovery by ignorant white people. That's our system. But for me, the discovery was Robert Fort told me that Albert Hoffman had told him about a low dose. And I thought that was interesting. My entire career has been with relatively high doses. You know, if it isn't transcendence and you don't vanish as a being and you're not one with all things, I'm not that interested. So what does the universe do for me? It says, why don't you look at the absolute other end, at the most boring use of psychedelics ever created. No mystical visions, no snakes eating you alive, no angelic being saying, you're really special. And everyone else is too, but you can't hear that. So microdosing, it turns out, makes you feel better. And as Eilett's great book says, it's called a really good day. And those of you who have not microdosed have had really good days, so you know what I'm talking about. Now, the first question was, why does this little teeny bit have any effect at all? And one of the nice things is there's research. And there's a lot of research on very low and microdoses. There's a book coming out in a couple of weeks called The Science of Microdosing. And the research is all very clear. There are no effects below 25 mics. Now, the problem with all that research is that they were looking only for what we would call classic psychedelic effects. So they missed everything else. But being good scientists, they said there are no effects, rather than here are the things we looked for and there weren't those. Would have been a little more correct. The other problem, the other question was, given how amazing microdosing is, and I'll go into it in a little bit, why hadn't we been noticing, at least for the past 50 years? Because remember, most LSD work in the world comes in two phases. One, up till the government stopped it, and it was the most researched psychiatric drug on the planet, several thousand research papers. Then there was the period of enormous use, which is, at least in the United States, since it became illegal, 26 million Americans have tried LSD. And that figure goes up 400,000 to 600,000 each year, no matter what's going on in the drug world. But nobody was paying attention to microdoses. Well, curiously, I was going back to what Sandoz had done, because in the good old days, You wrote Sandoz and they sent you some LSD and said, tell us how you're using it. And the government, if you were doing it that way, gave you an exemption to do that and you were on your way. Sandoz only provided LSD in ampules, that's a little bit of glass with a little bit of liquid, 25 mics, or tablets, 25 mics. No one ever considered that there was anything else below that. Well, there is. And in fact, there's a lovely thing which you might just think about with other pharmaceuticals you may have been given. Albert Hofmann said on the package, when Sandoz sent it out, it said, before you give this to anyone else, you must use it yourself. Now that's packaging.
And this is me quoting you. You have been fine-tuned over millions of years to desire to be in harmony with the natural world, to be curious about your own mind, and to recognize the essential unity of which you are a part. Whether or not you ever choose to use psychedelic experiences as part of your own self-discovery, your decision should be an informed one. The second one I wanted to read.
Wait. I like that one. Whoever he was, I like what he said.
The increased awareness, this is you again, the increased awareness offered by psychedelics come in different forms. In higher doses taken in safe and sacred settings, they facilitate recognition of one's intimate relationship with all living things. In moderate doses, they facilitate awareness of the intricate psychodynamic structures of one's individual consciousness. In low doses, they facilitate awareness of solutions to technical and artistic problems.
Really of that audience, not of the United States in general, but of that audience. And there was a certain number of people that said, God didn't want you to take psychedelics. You should only do things that are natural or whatever, kind of an against. And it doesn't really help, and people go crazy. And I've seen those forever. The difference was the counter comments were, what's your evidence? Mm. And suddenly I realized for the first time in decades that the against people were on the defensive, that they no longer could just say, I'm against this because I have no reason that I possibly know of, but somehow I'm against it. Yeah. Or my grandmother was against it. And people are saying, well, I'm fine. If you're against it, what is it you're against? Are you against people who are depressed not being depressed? Are you against people who are dying feeling okay about it? So that's a cultural shift in the general population, where instead of a large against, which is what the government, if you listen to the government for the past 40 or 50 years, that's what they said. Say no to drugs, N-O, instead of no to drugs, K-N-O-W. Mm. And we all, some of us remember the wonderful advertisement of this is your brain on drugs and it's a scrambled egg. And actually your brain is not a scrambled egg. I just have to break it to you. What we're finding, with psychedelic, with a scrambled egg, we're actually finding that the brain, when it has a psychedelic to help it, is more flexible. Mm. Can think in more directions, is in touch with more parts of itself, so to speak. So that the negativity is now based on, I don't quite know what's going on, versus the older negativity is, I don't know what's going on, but I know it's bad.
Yeah.
So I'm actually almost stunned at the lack of negativity. Now, partly it's also because suddenly there's money in psychedelics. Mm. And it is amazing how greed moves the research forward. Let us say psychedelics never had a lobbyist in Washington. Now they do.
Yeah.
So they're part of the culture in a way that the 60s weren't. The 60s were against the culture. They were the counterculture. No one talks about psychedelics as a counterculture anymore. They simply talk about it as, gee, these are interesting substances that seem to help a lot of people, and maybe we should look more, into it more.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift.
The research you are probably best known for, which is the Fadiman protocol and microdosing in general.
Yeah.
And I know you know a lot about the variety of psychedelics that exist in the world, what kind of specifically each one seems to be tailored to address in terms of human psychological ailments or anxieties. As it relates to microdosing specifically,
Sandoz Pharmaceuticals never would do research in those very small areas because he said if they had, there would have been no market for Ritalin. Now, today we would say no market for Adderall or Provigil. Well, that was interesting. And I went away from literally having lunch with Robert thinking, well, that's curious. I mean, I don't know why anyone would waste their time with little teeny doses, but Hoffman is, worth talking to, worth listening to. And some opportunities came up to talk to other people about the possibility. And I was living in a subculture where if you said, have you tried this? A lot of people would say, no, I haven't. What is it? I will.
Yeah.
And so I asked people, would they be interested in a term that I think I thought I developed, with the words out in the language well before that, microdosing, meaning LSD comes in micrograms. So it seemed like a nice term. And what I got from people is they liked it. That was pretty much the level I got. And then I said, well, since you like it, would you be willing to write me a note and saying what it is you like? And that's how it started. And it turns out that I had no idea, certainly, of the word microdose. I had no idea that anyone had ever discovered this but Hoffman and me. And at one point I was feeling, wow, I'm really important. I am discovering a new use of psychedelics. And an anthropologist friend said to me, did it ever occur to you that the people who've used this for hundreds or thousands of years might have tried low doses? And I thought, oh. And now a friend of mine, Adam Bradledge, is finishing a book talking about all over the world indigenous uses of microdoses usually for enhanced, both for healing and for enhanced kind of physical, emotional, and visual capacity. If you're in a hunting society, for example, a hunting and gathering society, hunters whose vision is better do better.
Yeah.
Hunters whose reflexes are faster do better. Hunters who have more endurance do better. And it turns out in many of those cultures where psychedelics are available in some sort, that's what it's used for. So it turned out I was rediscovering a very ancient use. And the rediscovery simply went in, since I didn't know about the early use, I had several years where I could pretty much discover without feeling embarrassed that I was treading on indigenous toes. So as more and more people began to try microdosing, more and more different stories appeared.
I just know this in my own personal life that, dipping a toe in the water with a much smaller dose, a microdose, is just more appealing. I think, yeah.
And it has let's take kind of one of the major discoveries in what's called the psychedelic renaissance, which is really a revival of what we did in the 60s. Psychedelics under high dose, safe guides, alleviates depression, alleviates treatment-resistant depression, which means people who've had a lot of treatments that didn't work. That's really remarkable. And it's about 80% of people really have a incredible breakthrough, and they say, I'm not depressed. Meaning not that I'm better, but I'm not depressed.
Yeah.
Well, microdosing over a period of a few weeks has about the same effect, which is about 80% of people say, I'm back. I have all my emotions. I'm not depressed. So these are two different paths to, in a sense, the same way, but one is without any excitement. It's what we learn when you take a vitamin, which is if you take it once, nothing.
Yeah.
because it needs to accumulate within the body, and the body needs to begin to adapt to having it, which increases its effectiveness and so forth. And microdosing fits that model very well.
What does seem to be, in terms of the dosage quantity and the frequency, kind of the sweet spot for most people with, microdosing for the kind of improvements that they may be after, whether it be depression or mood, etc. Personal adaptation and tinkering to kind of find, as we said, the sweet spot for an individual. But in general, what tends to be your perspective on frequency?
Well, in general, it's not much, not often, and take time off. Okay, now let's break that down a little.
Yeah.
Not much is only as much as feels correct. That's the sweet spot. Not often is there. There are every different what we're calling protocols, which really just schedules how often you take it. All have breaks of 1 to 2 days during the week. And the take time off is people who are using microdosing, say, for a month or two. Almost all the groups around the world independently came to the notion that it seemed like a good idea now and then to take a week or a month away from using. Part of it because it's anti-addictive, and this allows the body to operate without it, as makes sense. It's like you don't if you're going to the gym to increase your muscular strength, you don't stay there all day.
Yeah.
You push your muscles a little, and then the rest of your day, your body adjusts to what you've done, readjusts, hundreds of chemicals. And when you return to the gym, you're in a better position. You're improving from a different base rate.
Yeah.
Or a different stage. So the protocol that I came up with, which has become popular, was not at all designed for what it's used for. Science is based on fumbling around, going in the wrong door, making mistakes, and microdosing fits modern science. I realized early on that one of the curious things about microdosing is that people said, although the substance is pretty much gone from the body within a few hours, people said the second day was almost as good, and for some people better than the first day. Well, I was trying to find out what were the effects. So I wanted people to be able to go down to their normal pre-microdose state and then come up again and have more observations. So I suggested to people, if they didn't mind, for a month, take it on day 1, take 2 days off, the second day being we know about, and the third day should be bringing them down to baseline. And therefore I would get like 10 different uptakes that people would observe. Now, it's happened after around a month, people said, the third day seems like the other days. So it began the system had now adjusted to a healthier level. But that was where that quote protocol came from. It was my way of trying to find out stuff. It was never suggested as the best possible way because I hadn't any idea. Paul Stamets came up with either take it for 5 days and take 2 days off, or take it for 4 days and take 3 days off. And I've heard Paul say both. So I asked him, I said, wait. I get this question of protocol, and you have these 2 protocols. And he says, well, you can't be too rigid. And what he was saying is people have to figure it out. Another protocol is every other day. Another protocol is weekends only. What people find is what works best for them. Let's just talk dose for a moment, because the term sweet spot, you see, is a very interesting one. All of us know what it means.
Yeah.
But if you go to your bathroom and open that little door above the sink and you look at prescriptions, there's no sweet spot.
Yeah.
There are differences, maybe 10 or 25 or 50 of something, but if your sweet spot is 32, the system isn't designed for that. Asking someone else to tell you what you should put in your body, and often when you report back that, yeah, I'm not depressed anymore, but I'm constipated and angry most of the time, And you're told, well, that's a side effect. When you begin to look at people's medical closets, particularly older people, a number of their medications are to counter the side effects of prior medications. And it's a scary kind of escalation.
Yeah.
And there's a woman who works with people who are not going to get better. They're in kind of very bad shape. And they come in with a stack of medicines. And she said, normally I could easily eliminate 70% of the medications they were on because they were basically medications for medication. So psychedelics are a lot cleaner than that, which is their effects are so, microdosing especially, their effects are so general that you don't want to pack in more different kinds of psychedelics or so forth. You ready for a major revelation?
Yes.
This was I realized an ad once for alternative medicine that says there are no side effects.
Mm.
There are only effects.
Yeah.
And I suddenly got side effects was this brilliant marketing tool. Because obviously, it's only effects. Something affects you. And and you're taking it because you want a positive, beneficial effect, and you have also negative effects.
What kind of suffering, human suffering, seems to be addressable with a consistent dose of microdosing? Where is the hope for people that are really having a hard time in exploring these as possibilities?
Well, there's two levels. One is mental illness is a very kind of fuzzy, messy thing.
Yeah.
It's the only area in medicine where every 4 or 5 years they remake all the definitions.
Yeah.
Nobody ever says, let's redefine the appendix. Nobody ever says. But people say, let's redefine depression. Let's redefine manic depression, by the way, went away. It's now bipolar.
Yeah.
Disassociation went away for basically, curiously, the boxes keep getting with new labels. Human suffering seems to be about how one deals with the illusion of separation.
Mm.
The illusion of separation is that my being ends at my fingertips. And what people report, again, a few thousand cases, is people are more attuned to and spend time in nature when they have had psychedelic experience. This is of any level.
Yeah.
People in nature report that they feel better and that there's something about being in the natural world that is inherently healing. Now, we also know something that from Japan called forest bathing. And it turns out that if you're walking in a forest, you are literally getting showered with antibiotics and antivirals that trees are putting out all the time because they have the same problem you do of viruses and bacteria liking to eat them. Mm. So literally, you're getting a healing shower being in nature. We know when you go to the ocean, you feel better. Now, something about negative ions perhaps changing in the air, but you feel better. So one of the alleviations of human suffering indirectly is people becoming more attuned to the natural world. The other attunement, again, hundreds of cases, is they feel less alone, less alienated, less separated. And this is independent of, again, diagnosis. And when when there are other people in your life who you like and they like you, you are feeling better. Then you have what we only have begun to touch is the alleviation of pain.
Yeah. And
there's an amazing number of microdose reports of different kinds of physical illness. And that generally, I get a letter now and then that says, can I use it for Parkinson's? And the answer is the people who've had Parkinson's, who've used microdoses, don't report much improvement in Parkinson's, but they become more social again. Mm. They lose a lot of the underlying depression, which if you have Parkinson's, you have some depression and you're right. Mm. But you don't have to live that way.
Yeah.
So the alleviation of human suffering happens at all levels. And that, I'm trying to think of a parallel, and the parallel is that when some products from the New World, called, say, for instance, the potato, came to Europe it made a difference in the amount of famines that Europe was experiencing, because crops fail, weather's difficult, there's no storage, etc. And the changing of having new foodstuffs shifted literally the life experience of millions of Europeans, because they had a healthier diet and or at least a 12-month-a-year diet. Microdosing and psychedelics in general improve human functioning. And the other side of that is when people are not alienated and unhappy, they are less likely to be unkind to other people. So there's some very large possibilities. And in the 60s, the notion was that psychedelics could wake people up, and awakened people could take care of the world better. That probably has not changed.